Close your eyes now, and let me carry you back beyond memory, beyond the first breath of wind across water, beyond the first spark that lit the darkness, back to when the universe was nothing but a question mark hanging in the void. I am your guide through these shadow paths of ancient knowing. Tonight, we walk among gods who bleed starlight, giants whose dreams become mountains, and trees that hold the weight of eternity in their roots. These are not mere stories. They are the whispered secrets of existence itself, passed down through the smoke of countless fires, through the voices of those who understood that every ending contains the seed of a new beginning. So settle deeper into the night. Let the world outside fade, like a half-remembered dream. What I'm about to tell you happened before time learned its own name. Picture, if you can, the most profound silence you've ever known. Then multiply it by eternity. That was Ginnungagap. Not mere emptiness, but a living void that breathed, a cosmic lung expanding and contracting in rhythms older than heartbeats. This was the gap between intention and creation, the pause between one thought and the next. If you could stand at its edge, though there were no edges then, you would hear it, humming with potential, pregnant with every story that would ever be told. To the north, imagine winter given form and consciousness. Niflheim, where mist wasn't just moisture and air, but the very essence of patience made visible. Here, 11 rivers, called the Ilivagar, flowed like liquid moonlight, carrying not the water but the dreams of what coldness could become. Each drop was a possibility crystallizing, each ice crystal a prayer frozen in mid-formation. And to the south, Muspelheim. If Niflheim was winter's meditation, then Muspelheim was summer's wild dancing. Not merely fire, but fire that had learned to love itself, flames that sang opera while they consumed, heat that painted aurora across the void's dark canvas. At its heart stood Surtur. Imagine a star that chose to become a warrior, a sword forged from the first light that ever dared pierce darkness. Between these realms of ice thought and fire passion, something miraculous began. When frost breath met flame whisper in the heart of Ginnungagap, the universe learned its first word. Yes. Ice surrendered to warmth. Warmth surrendered to ice. And from this cosmic love affair, life awakened. The first drop that fell was not water, it was liquid possibility. The second was liquid time. And when the third drop fell, it had learned to dream. And from that dream came Ymir, the ancestor giant, large as wonder, old as questions. Now here's something the old storytellers whispered by dying fires. Before there were mothers, there was Audumla. Picture her. Not as any earthly cow, but as nurturing itself given form. Her hide shimmered with the colors of aurora. Her breath was warm fog that smelled of tomorrow's possibilities. From her 4 teats flowed milk that wasn't milk, but pure sustenance. The kind that feeds not just bodies, but souls, dreams, the space between thoughts. Ymir drank and grew, and from his very sweat came others. Giants tumbling from him like dreams spilling from a sleeping mind. But Audumla, patient mother of beginnings, had her own hunger. She licked at blocks of ice that tasted of salt and starlight. And oh, what devotion she showed, licking for hours, days, her warm tongue, patient as love itself. On the first day of licking, hair appeared in the ice, golden as honey in sunlight. On the second day, a head emerged, noble as morning, wise as the pause, between lightning and thunder. On the third day, Buri stepped free, the first being to be born not from chaos or accident, but from persistence and care. He was tall as hope, radiant as the moment when you finally understand something that had puzzled you for years. From Buri came Bor. From Bor and the giant maiden Bestla came 3 brothers who would midwife creation itself. Odin, who would learn to see with eyes closed. Vili, who would give will to the willing. And Ve, who would make sacred the profane. The brothers looked upon Ymir, their ancestor enemy, and saw the terrible truth that all creators must face. Sometimes, for something beautiful to be born, something else must die. This was not murder. This was transformation. Ymir's death was not an ending, but a metamorphosis so complete that every atom of his being would become foundation for everything that would ever live, love, or dream. His flesh, still warm with giant dreams, became the earth beneath your feet. Every grain of soil remembers being part of something larger. His blood, salt with giant tears, became every ocean, every lake, every drop of rain that has ever kissed your face. His bones, strong as giant stubbornness, lifted themselves into mountains that scraped the belly of heaven. His teeth and broken bones scattered into every pebble you've ever kicked, every cliff face that's ever made you gasp with wonder. His skull, vast as giant thoughts, became the dome of sky. And when you look up at night, you're seeing the inside of a consciousness that once dreamed of fire and ice. And his hair, his great wild hair, became every tree, every blade of grass, every flower that has ever made you pause and remember that beauty exists. From his eyebrows, the brothers built a wall, not to keep anything out, but to create the first garden, the first sanctuary. They called it Midgard, the Middle Earth, a place where future beings might walk upright and dream their own dreams. But the most magical touch of all, they took sparks from Surtur's realm, fragments of that cosmic fire, and flung them across Ymir's skull sky. And there they stuck, glowing, becoming every star you've ever wished upon. Listen closely now, for this is the secret, at the heart of all secrets. In the center of everything that was, is, and ever could be, an ash tree took root. But calling Yggdrasil a tree is like calling the ocean a puddle. This was the tree of trees, the axis upon which all existence turned, the great green spine of reality itself. Its roots. Oh, its roots. They didn't merely grow down. They grew through the fabric of possibility itself. 3 roots, each drinking from wells that contained different aspects of truth. The first root drank from Urda's well, where 3 sisters sat weaving, not cloth, but fate itself. Past, present, and future flowed through their fingers like golden thread, and every decision you've ever made, every path you've ever chosen, was visible in their tapestry. The second root drank from Mimir's well, where wisdom collected like honey in a cosmic hive. This was understanding so pure it hurt to contemplate, the kind of knowledge that changes you just by touching it. The third root drank from Hvergelmir, the bubbling spring from which all rivers are born, the source that feeds the source, the beginning that remembers its own beginning. And in this tree lived an entire universe of beings. At its crown perched an eagle, wise as wind, whose wing beats created the currents that carried clouds across the sky. At its base coiled Nidhugger, the dragon who gnawed at roots not from malice, but from a deep understanding that even immortal things must someday change. Between them scampered Ratatusker. Imagine a squirrel with the soul of a gossip columnist, carrying messages, insults, and secrets up and down the trunk. Sometimes truth, sometimes lies, always with the mischievous delight of one who knows that communication itself is a form of chaos. And hanging from Yggdrasil's branches, like impossible fruit, were 9 worlds, 9 different ways reality could express itself. Asgard, where gods built halls from crystallized courage and bridges from rainbow light. Vanaheim, where the Vanir gods tended gardens that grew prosperity like other gardens grow roses. Jotunheim, wild and rocky, where giants composed symphonies from thunderstorms and painted with avalanches. Midgard, the precious middle realm, where future humans would learn to tell stories around fires. Alfheim, where light elves danced in beams of pure illumination. Svartalfheim, deep delved, where dwarves hammered starlight into tools and sang mountains into new shapes. Niflheim, the ancient mist realm dreaming its cold dreams. Muspelheim still blazing with primordial fire, and Helheim, quiet and necessary, where endings learned to be comfortable with themselves. Each world was both separate and connected, like chambers in a vast heart, each with its own rhythm, but all pulsing together in the great circulation of existence. Now, in Asgard, the gods had built something magnificent, halls that sang when the wind touched them, walls that remembered every feast they'd sheltered, bridges that arched across impossible distances, simply because someone had dreamed them sturdy enough. The Aesir, Odin's folk, were gods of power and will, of the sharp edge where decision meets action. They were the gods you'd pray to before battle, the gods who understood that sometimes strength must speak louder than words. But in Vanaheim lived the Vanir, gods of a different kind entirely. Where the Aesir built towers, the Vanir planted orchards. Where the Aesir forged weapons, the Vanir brewed mead that could make poets of warriors. They were the gods of abundance, of fertility, of the deep magic that turns seeds into forests and love into new life. And because gods, like humans, sometimes let pride speak before wisdom, war came. Picture it. Spears that had tasted starlight clashing against shields painted with sunset colors. Sorcery battling steel, strategy wrestling with intuition. Walls that had never known violence, learning the taste of siege. It was Gulve who lit this particular fire, a Vanir sorceress whose very presence in Asgard had whispered uncomfortable truths about power and greed. 3 times the Aesir tried to burn her. 3 times she rose from the flames, reborn and unrepentant, her golden eyes holding knowledge that made even Odin uncomfortable. The war was long, the war was bitter, the war taught both sides that some victories cost more than defeat. So wisdom finally prevailed where weapons had failed. They exchanged hostages, not prisoners, but honored guests who would become bridges between their peoples. Njörður came to Asgard, bringing the whisper of waves and the promise of fair sailing. His children came too. Freya, who could make rain fall upward if it would make the crops grow better, and Freya, whose beauty wasn't mere appearance but the visible manifestation of life's endless creativity. And so the 2 tribes of gods became one family, though like all families, they carried their old grudges like heirlooms, polishing them occasionally when they needed something to argue about. Of all the gods, none hungered like Odin hungered. Not for food, though he occasionally remembered to eat. Not for drink, though his ravens brought him wine made from cloudberries. Odin hungered for knowing. The deep, dangerous kind that changes you. The kind you can never unknow once you've swallowed it. He had already traded an eye for a drink from Mimir's well. Imagine that moment. The Allfather, ruler of gods, reaching into his own skull and plucking out an eye like someone picking an apple, then dropping it into water that held every secret since time began. The eye sank slowly, still seeing, still watching, becoming part of the deep knowledge it had helped purchase, but even that wasn't enough. He hanged himself on Yggdrasil, his own spear piercing his side. No food for 9 days, no water for 9 nights. Just hanging there. Odin hanging from Odin, sacrificing himself to himself, becoming both the question and the answer. And on the 9th night, when death was reaching out to shake hands with him, the runes revealed themselves. Not letters, but power itself made visible. 18 songs of knowing, each one a key, that could unlock different doors in reality's vast mansion. He fell from the tree screaming, not from pain but from understanding. The runes had shown him everything, every possible future, every path not taken, every ending that waited like patient wolves in the darkness. And among all those futures, one vision burned brightest and most terrible. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, his own death, and the death of everything he loved. This is why Odin wandered, cloaked and hooded, his wide hat pulled low, walking among mortals as Grimnir, as Harbard, as the Hooded One. He was gathering heroes for a war he knew he would lose, stockpiling courage for a battle that would consume gods and giants alike. Knowledge, it turns out, is not always a gift. Where Odin was complexity wrapped in a cloak, Thor was simplicity wielding a hammer. Red-bearded, strong-armed, loud-laughed Thor, the god who made children feel safe and giants check their door locks twice. Mjolnir wasn't just a weapon. It was physics made personal, the mathematical formula for thunder, given weight and handle. When Thor swung it, the very air applauded, lightning followed it, like a faithful dog, and thunder was just the sky's way of cheering. Oh, the stories they tell of Thor, how he once tried to drain the ocean and nearly succeeded, drinking horn after horn while giants watched in growing alarm. How he wrestled with old age herself, disguised as a bent crone, and though he lost, he fought so well that she admitted afterward she'd been genuinely worried. How he went fishing for Jormungandr, the world serpent, using an ox head for bait, and nearly dragged the creature from the sea bottom before the giant whose boat he'd borrowed cut the line in terror. But here's what the stories sometimes forget to mention. Thor wasn't just about strength. He was about protection. Every time thunder rolled across the sky, it was Thor walking the borders of Midgard, keeping the giants at bay. Every lightning bolt was him checking the locks on the world's doors. He was the god who answered when people called for help, not because he had to, but because protecting things smaller than himself was what made him feel most like himself. And then there was Freya. If beauty were a person learning to be a goddess, it would study Freya's example. But her beauty wasn't something she wore, it was something she was. The kind of beauty that exists in the pause between one heartbeat and the next, in the moment when darkness first notices dawn approaching. She wept tears of red gold for Oda, her lost love, though some whisper that Oda and Odin were the same, and her tears were for all the times duty called the All-Father away from love. Each tear, when it touched the earth, became a new flower, a new song, a new reason for poets to believe in tomorrow. Freya brought cedar to the Aesir, not just magic, but the other kind of knowing. Where Odin's runes were carved and sharp, cedar was fluid as water, changeable as smoke. It was the magic of intuition, of reading the patterns in how birds flew, of knowing what the weather was thinking before it made up its mind. She rode a chariot pulled by cats, not ordinary cats, but cats that had learned the secret of being simultaneously liquid and solid, of being in two places at once just because the notion amused them. And around her neck hung Brisingamen, the necklace of the 4 dwarfs, a piece of jewelry so beautiful that it made light itself jealous. The dwarfs had demanded 4 nights of love in exchange for it, and Freya had agreed because she understood that true beauty always costs something precious. Some called this shameful. They misunderstood. Freya knew that desire and magic are sisters, that creation requires passion, that the most powerful cedar comes from understanding what you're willing to sacrifice for what you love. Deep beneath the mountains, in halls lit by forge fire and crystal glow, the dwarfs practiced the most ancient art of all, making dreams solid. They were the universe's first engineers, but they worked in poetry rather than physics. Give them raw metal, and they'd return it to you as refined possibility. Show them your deepest need, and they'd hammer it into reality on their anvils of concentrated starlight. From their workshops came Mjolnir, which never missed its target because it had been taught the meaning of inevitable. Gungnir, Odin's spear, carved with runes that meant accuracy in 17 different languages. Draupnir, the ring that understood abundance so well it created 8 identical rings every 9th night. Skidbladnir, Freya's ship, which could be folded small enough to carry in a pocket, but was large enough to carry all the gods when unfolded. Gleipnir, the silk-strong chain that looked like a ribbon, but was woven from impossible things. The sound of a cat's footfall, the breath of a fish, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear and the spittle of a bird. Each treasure was paid for with wager, trickery, and the dwarves' peculiar sense of humour. They loved a good bargain, but they loved a good joke even more. And threading through every story, weaving in and out of every tale, like smoke through a house, was Loki. Loki, who was beautiful as flame and twice as dangerous. Loki, who could argue both sides of any question so convincingly that he'd sometimes change his own mind mid-sentence. Loki, who was giant-born but god-raised, belonging fully to neither world and therefore free to dance between them. He was silver-tongued and shape-strong, able to become anything necessity demanded. A mare when the gods needed a distraction, a fly when they needed spying done, a seal when they needed something retrieved from the bottom of the sea. Sometimes he saved the gods with his cleverness, talking frost giants out of their wages, tricking dwarfs into creating treasures, finding solutions to problems that wisdom and strength couldn't touch. Sometimes he endangered them with his restlessness, making bets they couldn't afford, promising things they didn't have, opening doors that were closed for good reasons. But perhaps this was always his purpose, to be the god of transformation, the sacred chaos that prevents the universe from becoming too comfortable with itself. Every pantheon needs a trickster, someone who keeps the stories moving, who ensures that even gods can't become too predictable. The other gods knew this, even when they were angry with him. They knew that a universe without Loki would be safer, certainly, but it would also be smaller, less interesting, less alive. Though they couldn't see it yet, couldn't know it yet, Loki was also preparing them for what was coming. Every crisis he created, every problem he forced them to solve, was training for the final battle, when all their improvisation, all their hard-won wisdom, would be tested against the ending of everything. But from Loki's chaotic unions would come the instruments of that ending: Fenrir the wolf, Jörmungandr the serpent, and Hel, half living and half dead, who would rule over the realm where all stories eventually rest. The seeds of Ragnarök were already planted, already growing in the shadows, fed by every choice the gods made, watered by every drop of giants' blood spilled in their wars. But for now, for this first age, there was peace, there was prosperity, there was the kind of happiness that comes from not yet knowing how the story ends. In Asgard, the gods built Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain, where heroes would feast and fight in preparation for the final battle. Its rafters were spear shafts, its thatch was shields, and its tables groaned under the weight of mead and the laughter of warriors who had died well. In Midgard, the first humans had been born, Ask and Embla, carved from ash and elm trees, given breath by Odin, blood by Vili, and warmth by Ve. They walked upright in the garden between the worlds, learning to name things, learning to love, learning to tell stories around fires that push back the darkness. The gods went about their business, Frigg weaving the clouds, Baldr shining like summer mornings, Tyr keeping the peace with his sword-calloused hands, Heimdall watching the rainbow bridge with eyes that could see truth itself. It was the golden age, when every day was a song and every night was a story, when the giants kept mostly to their mountains and the gods kept mostly to their halls, when the tree grew strong and the wells ran clear and the roots drank deep. But in the deep places, things stirred. Old grudges sharpened themselves on whetstones of memory. Ancient prophecies whispered to each other in voices like autumn wind. The Norns wove patterns that grew darker as they approached the present. And Odin, hanging in his high hall, watching everything through his one remaining eye, and the two ravens that were extensions of his thought, saw it all approaching like a storm on the horizon. So ends our first hour together, dear listener. We have walked the paths of beginning, seen the world born from sacrifice, watched gods learn to be themselves through their choices and their mistakes. We have witnessed the age of building, when every day added something new to the great song of existence. We have seen wisdom purchased with pain, power balanced by responsibility, and love complicated by necessity. But already, shadows lengthen. Already the threads of fate are pulling tight. In our next hour together, we will follow those threads into darker places, to the binding of Fenrir, to the death of Baldr, to the chains that will break and the fires that will consume. We will watch as the gods' choices return to them like ravens returning to roost. We will see how every kindness offered and every cruelty committed becomes part of the great weaving that leads to the end of this age and the beginning of the next. But that is for tomorrow's telling. Tonight, let yourself drift into sleep with the image of Yggdrasil green and strong, its roots drinking from eternal wells, its branches holding all the worlds in gentle embrace. Let yourself dream of gods who are learning what it means to be responsible for creation, of heroes who will answer the call when the final horn sounds, of stories that will survive, even the ending of the world that gave them birth. Sleep well, dreamer. The tree still stands. The wells still run clear. And somewhere in the halls of Asgard, Odin sits watching, planning, preparing for the war that will end all wars and make possible all new beginnings. Until we meet again in the twilight of gods,